Today begins a series of readings from Mark's Gospel that are focused around the Sea of Galilee. We have the crossing of the sea and the storm, which we just heard, a story I'm sure most of you are very familiar with. And in the next few weeks, we'll get stories that happen around the perimeter of the sea. One of the things we hear today is the calmness that comes out of the storm. We hear it in the gospel, we also heard it in the psalm. A calmness and stillness of knowing God's presence and having faith. Today we're talking about faith. Paul writes to the Corinthians and says, "Do not take God's love in vain." And he's asking them, where is your faith? I'm not seeing it. And he gives them this laundry list, which is something Paul loves to do, these lists. He gives them this list and says, it is faith that will carry you through all these things. This particular reading might sound familiar because we hear part of it not just every 3 years on this day, but every year on Ash Wednesday. Also a day having to do with faith. We remember our mortality and hear how faith will sustain us in the wilderness for the next 40-some-odd days. So Paul writes to the Corinthians and says, faith will carry you through these calamities and hardships. It won't take them away, but it will see you through and allow you to endure. This list signifies events that he and other apostles have endured themselves, and they're still here to talk about it. They're there because of their faith. And Paul asks the Corinthians to open themselves up, open their hearts to receive his testimony. Then in the gospel, Jesus, once he calms the storm, looks at the disciples in the boat and says, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" Where is your faith, he wonders. And when we hear this today and Jesus asks, "Why are you afraid?" we might want to agree with him. And we might say, yeah, why are you afraid? Jesus is right there in the boat with you. What is there to be afraid of? I wouldn't be afraid if Jesus were right in the boat with me. Well, maybe just a little bit. The disciples are afraid because there is a storm and the boat is being tossed around and they don't yet know who Jesus is and what Jesus can do. They are still learning to get to know him and understand him and figure him out. And I have to say, this story has always made me question why they are afraid, because as a child, I never felt like the Sea of Galilee was big enough to really make a difference if a storm came up. Now, obviously, I was naive as a child, but when you look on the maps in the back of the Bible and so forth, it doesn't look like it's that big of a body of water. I don't know how big it is. So fast forward to today when we all carry around a mega computer in our hands, and one day I thought, well, I'll just look up how big it is. Well, turns out it's about 13 miles long from top to bottom and 8 miles wide. Okay, so not that small of a body of water. It's actually a lake. It's not even a sea. It's just called a sea. So I guess it's big enough that a storm might affect you. It did say that it would take 2 hours to cross from one side to the other. I'm like, okay, I'll give them that. Jesus does take a nap, though, so it must be long enough for that. So this lake is the largest freshwater lake in all of northern Israel. So a storm would affect you crossing it. Jesus tells the disciples to go to the other side. And as they are rowing, a great storm comes up. And it might sound a lot like what we heard in the psalm today, a portion of Psalm 107, which talks about people going down to work in the sea in ships. They sail out, a storm comes up, they cry out to the Lord hears them, the storm and the sea are calmed, and they are all at peace. The same story as we heard in the gospel. Jesus does the same thing. And the psalm really speaks to me, and I want to share a story about it. This is a true story. I have to preface it with that. This is a true story. It actually happened to me, and I may have told some of you this before, so sorry if I'm telling it again, but for those who haven't heard it, enjoy. When I was in college at Sewanee, I sang in the university choir, and it was our custom to take a tour every year, and our tour always happened right after graduation when I was there. So this was right after my freshman year, and we were touring around the southeastern part of the United States. We take a week and we'd go to different cities, and we would go to these host parishes, and we would sing evensong. That was our what we did. And we had a repertoire of music that we took with us, so that it depended on the day which pieces we were to sing. The director would tell us which we were doing. So one of the anthems we took with us on our tour was Herbert Sumption's "They That Go Down to the Sea in Ships," the text of which comes out of the psalm we had today. And you're lucky because the choir will be singing that anthem today, so you'll get to hear it in its fullness after you hear my story. So choir, I'm really setting you up. You got to come through for us now. So you can follow along with me as I read this text to you. Sumption wrote this anthem in 1979, but used the Psalter that would have been in the 1662 Book of Common Prayer in England, or in our 1928 Book of Common Prayer. So that's the language I'm going to use as I read through it. You can think 1928 thoughts as you hear it, or you can look at the text in your bulletin of the anthem. So it was 1989, and we were in Charleston, South Carolina, singing at St. Philip's Church. St. Philip's is a very large, old colonial church with these beautiful, huge, clear glass windows on the sides. So it lets in a lot of light. It's important that you know that. So we arrived at the church in the evening. It was in May. It was a beautiful day. It had been beautiful all day. Sunny, bright. Sun was shining beautifully. Light was just pouring in the windows of the church. And we began the service, and we get to the point where, in evensong, where we sing an anthem, and it's that Sumption piece. Sun still shining through the windows, everything's beautiful. So now listen as I read the text of the psalm and tell you what happened. They that go down to the sea in ships and occupy their business in great waters. These men see the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep. For at his word the stormy wind ariseth, which lifteth up the waves thereof. Yes, it's hard to pronounce sometimes. At this point in the anthem, as we were singing these words, the sky began to get dark, and we began to hear thunder. Thunder that seemed to come out of nowhere because it had been so beautiful. And we sang on. They are carried up to the heaven and down again to the deep. Their soul melteth away because of their trouble. They reel to and fro and stagger like a drunken man, and are at their wits' end. So when they cry unto the Lord in their trouble, he delivereth them out of their distress. And the music that accompanies these words paints a vivid picture. You're going to hear it in just a few minutes. You can actually feel the waves going up and down, rolling, growing and falling, rising and crashing, and the people being tossed to and fro. We're singing this, and then you can hear the rain start beating against the windows of the church, and there's lightning, and the thunder keeps going, and the sound of the rain in the place is so loud, and we're just singing away and kind of looking around at each other going, I cannot believe what is happening right now. But we can't stop. So we keep singing, but we're all in this state of amazement as what we're singing is literally coming to life around us. The text says they cry out to the Lord, and the Lord delivers them. And we sing these words, and then the next, for he maketh the storm to cease, so that the waves thereof are still. At this point, the sound around us begins to get quieter as the rain stops. The thunder rolls off into the distance, and the sun, ever so slowly, begins to peek back out again. And the itsy bitsy spider, no, that's a different song. Then the text continues. Then they are glad because they are at rest. And so he bringeth them unto the haven where they would be. Now everything is quiet and calm. And as the anthem ends, the final chord lifts us as if we were looking up to see the sun once again in the sky. And there it is, full sunshine, beaming once again through the windows of the church. All of this in approximately 6 minutes of time. After the service, all of us in the choir, and I'm sure those in the congregation, just looked at each other and thought, wow, if there were ever a time we did not have faith, we do now because of what we just experienced. Singing those words and feeling that music and seeing what was happening outside, it was one of the most phenomenal things I had ever seen, and I couldn't believe it was actually happening. And to hear me tell the story, you may say to yourself, you just made that up. But I didn't. I actually experienced it. And I have witnesses too. Jesus said to the disciples, "Why are you afraid? Where is your faith?" Having had that experience, and no, I have to say, we weren't doubting when the service began, but afterward our faith was even stronger. God was definitely present. We could feel it. Faith is not going to save you from enduring those hardships, any hardships in life. But faith gives us the assurance that we will come out in the calm on the other side. Paul tells the Corinthians to open themselves up to understand that. Jesus tells the disciples to strengthen their faith, and that faith will see them through. May our faith continue to see us through.